What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we're gonna shoot out the Revision E dual rectifier and the Revision G dual rectifier to finally settle the debate which reigns supreme. Let's do it! Alright guys, hope you're doing great out there. Today, as I stated, I have the very distinct pleasure of having the Revision E dual rectifier in my possession at the moment, as well as my Revision G. There is always a debate around which revision of the early revisions is best. The ones that you can get your hands on go from C all the way to G. G being the mass-produced version that we know and love from roughly the mid-90s all the way to the early 2000s when the 3-channel rectifier was introduced. Now the Revision E is actually the rarest of all the early revisions. I am not 100% sure how many were produced. I think it's somewhere around 100. I'm also not super familiar with what was changed from Revision E to Revision F or even Revision E to Revision G. But I think I know someone who can help us.
The differences between a Rev G and a Rev E aren't as huge as the internet would have you think. Now, the Rev G is the classic rectifier tone. It's definitely more scooped and more, you could call it tubby. But a Rev E, in comparison, is much brighter, is a little bit more aggressive, and doesn't have the crazy low end that the Rev G has. It almost sounds boosted without having a boost in front of the amp. But if you want Rev E tones with a Rev G, just, stick an overdrive in front of it. Kyle, back to you.
Thank you, Fluff, for the information. We greatly appreciate it here at Belligerent Amateur Studios. Now, Fluff has also compiled a list of facts, actual facts that he put together and worked with Mesa on to verify regarding all of the early revision rectifiers. There is a website that he has compiled this all on. I will put the link in the description down below. It is a great source of information and puts a lot of the misinformation and lore behind the early rectifiers to bed, because we now have a good, solid, factual reference that has been verified with Mesa, compiled by Mr. Fluff himself. So go down in the description and check that out. Anyways, that intro clip that you guys heard, I had both amps set up basically as close as I could get them to sound, and they sound pretty close. I had a boost in front, which was the Electric Eye Mud Killer, that is great at taking out some of those low-end frequencies that tend to cause mud. Go figure, the Mud Killer. So anyways, we're gonna click that off. Here's each amp the way that I had them set up. Here's each amp the way that I had them set up with no boost engaged. We are on the orange channel on both, and let's hear how that sounds. Real quick before we do that, if this is your first time here at my channel, what I do is take awesome high-gain amps, cabinets, overdrives, guitars, and pickups, and record them with a simple SM57 setup, and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. If you like cleans and leads, this is not the channel for you. If you like E-stander thrash and hardcore riffs, and dudes whose gym shorts are always hiking up questionably high, be sure to hit the like button on your way out and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of my stuff. Thank you. All right, so let's start with the Rev E. Over to the Rev G. Okay, so overall, the differences that I'm noticing right off the bat is the Rev E is slightly leaner, it's a little bit less mid-forward, and honestly, there seems to be a little bit less clarity, whereas the Rev G seems to have not only more lower mids, but more middle of the road mids, I guess you could say. I wouldn't say they're more upper mids. It just seems rounder and a little bit more forward in the mids than the Rev E does, but it seems a little bit bigger on the low end as well. There also seems to be a little bit more articulation in like chords, so I find that kind of interesting because the Rev E is generally kind of considered to be one of the brighter and cleaner sounding rectifiers. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take everything back to noon and we're going to kind of dial them in from there, both on the orange and the red channel. Gain is at 9 o'clock and I'm gonna start to kind of dial them in from this position so you guys can see how they differ with the EQs in similar settings, and then we'll kind of dial them in to sound the same. All right, so the Rev E seems to have a little bit more gain off the bat, so let's bump up the gain on both amps around 11 o'clock. I'm also going to add some presence because they seem dull. We're gonna put the presence up around 2 o'clock. Okay, so again, the Rev G seems a little bit more mid-forward. The gain structure also seems a little bit more crunchy, like maybe a little bit more like dynamic, whereas it seems more smooth and saturated on the Rev E. So I find that a little bit surprising, but I'm gonna shut up. We're gonna dial this up to 1 o'clock because who the hell is playing rectifiers for low gain tones? All right, we're gonna dial in a little bit more presence on each. So again, the Rev G overall just seems like it has a lot more mid presence going on, which makes it sound a lot more forward. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some mids and some treble and some presence, a little bit more presence on the Rev E. Still pretty similar with the Rev E sounding a little bit smoother and a little bit tighter, and the Rev G sounding a little bit more spiky in certain frequencies. Let's dial that bass up on both amps. Pretty similar overall. Again, the Rev E is going to have more gain in the same position because it's going to come on faster with the 1 meg pot. Let's dial up the Rev G just a little bit just to see if we can match that gain. All right, so let's bump a little bit of treble in. Again, the Rev G just seems more forward in the mids. It seems a little bit tubbier on the low end, but surprisingly, it does have a little bit more mid content to my ears. So what we're gonna do now is kick in an overdrive. I'm gonna kick in something that you guys all kind of know and love, the SD1. That way it's a good reference point to how it reacts to a common overdrive. Okay, so now with the treble dialed up on the Rev E, it seems to be a little bit spikier up high and has a little bit more top end clarity. Pretty similar at this point. There's not a huge difference there. Now I'm kind of sensing that this is a little bit more upper mid spiky, whereas the Rev G is a little bit more hollow in the mids. So I'm gonna do the old treble at 0 trick, which if you guys don't know what that does on a rectifier, and a couple of other amps, it actually kind of broadens the mid-range out, and then you can kind of use the presence to add the top treble back into the mix. But honestly, they sound pretty damn good as is. So both of them sound great to me though. I like a little bit more forward mid sound, so I could be biased at this point. Okay guys, so again, the Rev E is a little tighter, it's a little bit more saturated, and it has a lot more upper mids going on. Let's bump the mids of the Rev G up to see if we can kind of match that. They just seem to be a little bit rounder and a little bit honkier on the G, whereas the Rev E has a spikier upper mid. All those things stand. I think this one sounds maybe not necessarily bigger in the low end, but it just sounds a little bit punchier, whereas the Rev G seems to have more like sub-low bass frequencies going on, which doesn't make it necessarily seem punchier, just makes it seem a little fatter. Real quick, we're gonna grab a drop C guitar and then we're gonna go to the red channel. All right, guys, I have my Gibson Les Paul Studio, same pickup. It's got the 498T in the bridge. We're just in drop C now. All right, so the Rev E sounds great, man. It's just got this, it's brighter, it's tighter, it's a little punchier overall, but it's kind of got like a guttural low mid thing going on. I just really dig the way that it sounds. Whereas the Rev G, I think it also sounds awesome, but again, there's a low mid frequency that got added to these amps that just, I think that's part of the huge sound of them. But at the same time, it really just kind of makes it sound a little bit congested in the low end, and the chugs don't kick quite the same way. But they both sound awesome, so all right. Over to the red channel. Okay guys, same deal. We are now on the red channel. The boost is coming off. We got the gain at 9 o'clock on both amps, so let's see how they differ at this setting. Okay, so the gain obviously comes on much quicker on the knob for the Rev E due to that 1 meg gain pot. Let's try this again. Okay, similar thing. We still have a little bit more gain here on the Rev E than we do on the Rev G. The presence is very bright because the negative feedback is taken out of the circuit on the red channel on these amplifiers, so they tend to be much brighter on the red channel. All right, let's get that gain up to noon. All the EQs are still at noon. Okay, so again, not a lot of difference other than the differences in gain. Let's push the gain up to just above noon on the Rev G and see if we can match the Rev E. They're pretty similar. The Rev G seems to be a little bit brighter in this mode, so let's push that gain up into high gain territory. Okay, so let's go ahead and make some adjustments here. Let's pull that bass back on both. Keep everything else where they're at. Mids at noon, treble at noon on both. Seems to have a greater effect on the Rev G than it does the Rev E. The Rev E still kind of woofy with that bass back like that. Let's pull it back to 9 o'clock. They're pretty much even. That's actually kind of surprising how similar they sound at this point. So yeah, that still kind of applies there. Pull the presence back a little bit more on the Rev G. They're pretty much equal. It's kind of crazy. There's a big difference in the low mids and how the lows react on these amps. Believe it or not, the Rev E sounds a little bit flubbier. Whereas the Rev G seems to have a little bit more low mid focus. Let's see what kicking in that same overdrive does. It's so weird, the difference in these two amps when you kick on an overdrive, it almost has different effects. This one tightens up significantly, whereas this one doesn't tighten up as much. With the overdrive off, I feel like this one, the Rev G sounds more focused in the lows, whereas the Rev E sounds a little bit more out of control. So it's kind of interesting in how differently they react to the boost, but it helps them both significantly in my opinion. So again, the Rev E just has way more upper mid presence going on with the boost on. It just, I don't know. I like it better. I think that the Rev G sounds great, but I like the Rev E on the red channel quite a bit better. But then again, you go back and forth and there's not a huge difference. So I don't know. Let's pull that bass back up to compensate for the overdrive being engaged. Let's pull the mids up a bit on both amps. All right, guys, so again, the Rev E is more forward in the mids, and I just feel like the Rev G is a little bit more low mid focused. They both sound huge in the bass, almost a little bit out of control on the red channel, as you would come to expect from the Rectifier. A lot of people love the modern channel because of that. More mids, more focused mids, more present mids. On the Rev G, you have a little bit more of an upper presence sizzle going on and a little bit more low mid focus. It's not quite as tight. So, all right guys, last riff in drop C, and then we are going to call it a day. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me today. What did you guys think about the differences between the Revision E and the Revision G dual rectifier? Do you think the Revision E lives up to the hype of being one of the crazy, super sought after rectifiers, or do you really think that the differences are just kind of minute and not nearly as blown up as everybody on the internet makes them to seem? Personally, I do like the Rev E better. I like that it's got a little bit tighter low end with the boost out front. I like that the mids are more forward. But overall, I don't feel like there's this massive significant difference night and day between one and the other. I feel like if you were to stick them both in the mix and EQ them as closely as possible, you'd have a really hard time picking one over the other. Or even so, you might pick the Rev G over the Rev E. It all depends, but personally, I would prefer to have the Rev E in my possession. I think it's an awesome sounding amp. I love where the mids are. It fits my ear a little bit better. But a lot of people like that super scooped, big modern sound of the Rev G. Now, of course, I got it to sound very close to this, but the mids definitely are in a lower position and they're definitely not as prominent. So, anyways, what did you guys think? Let me know down below in the comments. Very curious to hear your thoughts, which one you preferred, what did you hear on your end that I didn't hear, and I'll meet you down there to talk about it. Again, if you liked the video, please hit the like button on the way out. Consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Kyle here again. We'll see you next time.